Today we're going to be working with the Canon 7D Mark II once again, and in particular the autofocus cases. In the other videos in this series describing how to set up, or how I set up my 7D Mark II autofocus, we've pretty much covered almost everything else except the autofocus cases. So what are the autofocus cases? With the 7D Mark II, as well as the 5D Mark III and 1DX series, Canon have taken three autofocus parameters and then combined them in a bunch of presets. And these presets allow us to choose a group of settings that may suit certain requirements. To make it easier to understand, they've actually made up these 6 presets and assigned each one with a sporting symbol, which makes it easier to relate to what kind of sport you might be shooting at that time. As I shoot wildlife, and my subject matter tends to sometimes move a little more unpredictably than in a sport, and with perhaps a little bit more variety of colors and speeds to deal with, I found it easier to take the 3 parameters that are found in the autofocus cases and to actually put them in a menu on their own. That way I don't need to remember which case I was in or which one I used last. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It's very quick and easy. Once you hit the main menu button on the 7D2, you just keep hitting the Q button and skipping across until we get to the green My Menu tab, and then we press Configure, and the next one we choose is Select the items to register. So we've now got a vertical layout of all the 7D Mark II's menu items. So I'm just going to keep scrolling down. You can see there's a little bar that shows me how far down I'm going. I'm looking for those 3 parameters that make up. So I've got the first one, tracking sensitivity. I'm going to press set and choose OK. And the one directly underneath it, accelerate, decelerate tracking, we want that one. And I press OK. And then the third one that makes up the autofocus case preset is AF point auto switching. So we're on it now. We want that. You can see they accepted, and now I just press menu button, and I can now go to menu again, and my green menu now comes up with those 3 parameters. So now we can see them, and once we see their names and we start to use them with their names and their little settings screens, I find it's an easier way to get an understanding of what they're actually doing, rather than picking a case setting, which is a combination, and making a whole bunch of changes at one time. So the first parameter setting that we're going to be dealing with is one called tracking sensitivity. So this one is, to me, by far the most important of the 3 settings when it comes to how my autofocus performs. What this does is it determines basically how sticky your focus point is, if I can use that word, once you actually focus on something. So it doesn't really matter whether you're using a single point, a group of 1 and 5, or even a bigger cluster. The tracking sensitivity parameter influences how sticky and how long your focus will remain on whatever's under the focus point. It determines how long your focus is going to remain on a particular distance, even if you accidentally move the focus point away from the subject. So that can happen in a number of ways. It can happen as I'm following a subject. I may accidentally go a little faster or a little slower than that subject, and for a split second I might have my focus point no longer falling on that subject. So tracking sensitivity determines how quickly the camera will refocus on whatever is the background at that point in time. It can also happen if I'm tracking a subject and a new subject passes in between the camera and my existing subject, which I was not aware of, and passes between my focus point and my subject. So that could be something, a static thing like a tree or a bush if I'm tracking an animal side to side, or it might even be another animal or another bird. So I'm busy tracking one across the sky and another one flies in front of me. So with tracking sensitivity set to the minus side of the scale, the camera might wait up to a second before it decides to refocus either on the background or on the new subject. On the other hand, if I have tracking sensitivity set all the way to the responsive side or +2, it will instantly refocus on that new subject. So to get a feel of this parameter, I would suggest that you just sit down, put your camera into servo, bring up the sensitivity parameter and set it all the way to one side, set it all the way to the opposite side, and actually focus it on a subject and move it off, and you will see how quickly that change in focus reacquisition takes place. So moving it to the left-hand side of the scale can make the camera a little more forgiving, a little less likely to grab the background. So if I'm out in the field and I find that the lens that I'm using or the scene that I'm working in may have a subject and a background that are similar to one another, and I might be having a problem with my camera continually grabbing the background, then I'm going to take tracking sensitivity towards either 1 click or 2 clicks to the left on the scale, which makes it less responsive. The terminology used there is locked on. According to Canon, even setting tracking sensitivity to the left towards locked on, they state that it doesn't slow down initial acquisition. It shouldn't slow down, even though you're moving it over to the left, you're making it a little more stable. Their claim is that it doesn't slow down if you're refocusing on something new. That might be something that you may find a little different in your own use depending on what lenses you're using. So if you do feel it has slowed you down a little bit, then perhaps just use the one setting to the left. Back at the default setting now, if I switch the camera over towards the right side of the parameter, which is described as responsive, what I'm doing is I'm making it more reactive to any change in what lies under the focus point. So it becomes, to use a word that sort of fits how I feel, it becomes more twitchy. So you may enjoy having it react fast like that, and there are times when I will set it towards the responsive side, more especially if I'm using a shorter lens where it's not that serious if I lose the subject momentarily, because I can still see it in the viewfinder. I don't have one particular setting for tracking sensitivity that I always use on every lens that I go out with, but rather I keep it in the green menu so that I can access it quickly in the field and make changes as I need to. The second of the parameters that we work with in the cases, or now actually individually, is called accelerate or decelerate tracking. So that's a fairly new parameter that's only been introduced on some of Canon's newer cameras, like the 5D Mark III, 1DX, the new 1DX obviously, 5DS, and the 7D Mark II. So what that parameter does is it allows you to fine-tune the camera for subjects that may have very erratic motion. So should they accelerate and decelerate unpredictably and to a great degree, then we may change that setting towards +1 or even to a +2 setting. Again, shifting towards the +2 setting can make the camera's autofocus a little more twitchy and perhaps a little more likely to grab something that wasn't your intended subject matter, so it might require a little more input from you, but you might find that it helps you with erratic subjects. If we leave it set on 0, which is one of the default settings, 0 is a good setting for a subject that has a relatively stable rate of speed and travel. It's accelerate and decelerate tracking, and then the last one of these parameters is called autofocus point auto switching. So if you're shooting with a single focus point and that's your preferred way of shooting, you don't need to take any regard of the auto switching parameter. What it deals with is any time you're using more than a single point. So with a 7D Mark II having anything from 1 to 65 points, there may be times when you're using 1+5 or one of the other multi-point groupings, and what auto switching deals with is how quickly the camera will hand over focus from a selected autofocus point to the next focus point if it feels that the point that is originally chosen is losing contrast or losing focus. So another term to use for that is called handshaking. So basically you're talking about adjacent points and how fast it hands over from one point to the next if you're trying to follow something across the screen. So moving the setting to +2 will mean that it hands over very quickly to a neighboring adjacent autofocus point. If you have it at 0, it will be a more stable and a slower, longer period between handing over from one point to the next. So 3 parameters overall that make up the autofocus cases, and in my own opinion, tracking sensitivity is by far the one that has the biggest impact on how my camera tracks things and how easy or how difficult it is to keep it on a subject. Well worth putting in a little time with getting to know these parameters and how they can influence your camera's performance, because it can make a big difference in coming home with more keepers. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep getting videos about Canon gear from a wildlife photographer's perspective.